Thank you for coming this morning. It's great to see you. We're doing a little break from, usually it's biblical studies, we just finished the letters of John. In the fall, we're going to start the Gospel of Matthew. Thank you. She straightens up after me. It's lovely. I just love it, And so anyway, this is a little break. I've had it in mind for some time, a couple of years actually. Have been sort of thinking I was going to fill out the rest of this church school year with this series, Women of God Who Shaped History. I didn't know quite how many weeks I would have to work with because it took longer to get through John's letters than I expected. And so now I have more material than I have weeks, and that's a problem, So if you don't mind, I'm just going to keep teaching right through the summer, and then we'll do fine. We'll make it. Actually, what I'm going to do, these are the women we're going to cover. 12 of them, and I don't have 12 weeks. So I'm going to take my very favorites, and we're going to do those through this spring, and then there will be about 3 maybe left over, and I'm going to do those in the summer and upload them. So if you're feeling like we left somebody out and you want to go back and catch that one, then those will become available early in the summer, probably sometime in June. So that's the plan. So anyway, the ones that we're covering, you can see the list. Helena today. I have a little catchphrase for each of them. Monica was the mother of St. Augustine. Stubborn prayer is her little motto. Clotilda was the wife of Clovis, who united the Frankish world. And wonderful Christian lady, married to a pagan king. And she tried her best to convince him to become a Christian, and he would have none of it. He thought he was descended from the gods, doesn't need this Christian stuff. He loved her, and they had a nice relationship, but except one day he was in the middle of a battle, and he was losing badly, and it looked like it was curtains, and he cried out in desperation, true story, "Help me, God of Clotilda, my wife, get me out of this," and he won the battle. He went back, and within a week he was baptized and became one of the most ferocious Christians of the world at that time. Wonderful story. I've already stolen my thunder, but I'm so excited about it. I just have to give that to you, Elizabeth, a royal servant. I won't touch on all of these, or I won't have any time left. But these are all wonderful women, powerful personalities, touched by grace, shaping history in ways that probably most of us haven't really appreciated. I certainly was not appreciative of it until I'd had a chance to study some of this. So that's what's coming. We're starting this morning with Helena, who is the mother of Constantine. She is the one, I would say, about whom we know the least. She's 1,500 years back, and that puts us at a bit of a distance. And the problem is her story has been embellished. You know how it is. Somebody does something remarkable or has a remarkable life, and there is a tendency in history to keep embellishing the story. And so you have to kind of sift through and try to figure out what really was going on there. And with Helena, we have to deal with some of that. So I'm going to try to be fair and honest and report it, I think, as the best sources deliver the information to us. And there are little parts of the story that may strike you as a little over the top, so I'll just leave it to your judgment to think about that. But that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to try to find what I'm going to call a sort of life verse or theme verse for each of these women as we go along. And the verse that came to my mind with respect to Helena is this one from the Apostle Paul, writing in 1 Corinthians 15, these words. He's sort of describing his apostleship as an apostle born out of due time, a little late, Johnny come lately, he wasn't a disciple, but he became one late. So he writes this, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. Take it or leave it is sort of the deal. And his grace was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was in me. I think Helena could probably say every one of those words and mean it, based on her own life experience and what led her to become one of the most famous women in the history of the church. So, with that, let's have a word of prayer and we'll get started. Our Father, we are deeply grateful that you have used so many instruments to deliver to us such a rich heritage. We know some stories, many we don't know, and some we barely know. And as we look at some of these stories that have so profoundly left their fingerprints on the story of history, we pray we'd be fair to what actually happened, and at the same time recognize readily enough that your grace had to be involved to produce the effects that certainly came from them. And so we thank you for these women that we'll be studying and ask your blessing on us as we seek to explore their lives. And for all of that, we give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to divide Helena's life up into 4 chapters, and each of them is about 20 years. Now, this is a little bit arbitrary. One of my 20-year chapters is actually 30 years, and one is just 10 years, but it averages 30 years. So this is it. Early years, 250 to 270. This is her childhood and early youth. Middle years, 270 to 290, in which she's married to a Roman foot soldier named Constantius. Not really married. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Silent years, 290 to 320. We don't know much about it. We know that somewhere along the line she came to the Christian faith quite emphatically and truly, and that there was a big change that happened in her, but the details of it are at best what we can only triangulate, but we don't really have a lot of detail. She didn't leave us detailed journals or anything like that, and other historical sources weren't really aware of her. There were important people in the world, and people didn't know she was one of them, you see, and so we have to kind of work with what we have. The final, her famous years, 320 to 330, she died in 330. If you know anything about Helena, then you know that probably by far the thing she's most known for is she being the mother of Constantine, who had now just become the emperor of the entire Roman world, was commissioned to go to the Holy Land, which up until then had been buried in pagan rubble, and unearth at least what she could of the actual remains of evidence of the life of Christ going back there. So people know her for that. That's what she's mainly famous for. But the rest of her story is largely unknown to folks, and I'd like to focus more on that this morning. So, early years. She was born in 248. Of course, born female, non-elite, non-urban, illiterate. If there was anybody for whom the prospects were grim, it was this woman. She had no particular status. She wasn't royalty. She didn't have anything going for her that we would say would at least mark her as someone that had a great, bright, wonderful future. I would say that probably in the average assessment of her life, we would think it's highly probable she'd just be one of those millions upon millions of people we've never heard of and honestly really don't care about. That was the status into which she was born. She was not born into a Christian family. She had no Christian influence that we're aware of whatsoever until much later. So she's born into essentially Roman paganism, mid-3rd century, not a good time for the Roman world. This is kind of a time of decay, and that's the culture in which she's born. She, in her teenage years, worked, and the term that's used is the term stabularia. Now, you may or might not know what that term means, but I'm going to tell you frankly, bluntly, it's a polite word for a prostitute. At this point, I know we're a little, put off by that. This was the culture, friends. This was a time when the moral life of Rome was reaching its depths. The only positive influence in town was the Christians, and they were persecuted. And so the expectation was if you weren't born with some kind of special privilege, then you were probably going to wind up in some sort of unfortunate capacity. I don't think it took her as a surprise. She kind of knew this from the beginning, and probably during her teenage years, that's what she worked as. It would be can I put it this way? It was just a typical service offered by the inns and hotels of the day. You want breakfast? Fine, you got this, you got that. Oh, by the way, we have this benefit too if you want to pay a little extra. It's that kind of thing, you see. And so that's probably what she experienced in her early years. And so, as I say, nobody was holding out any hope for her that she would be anything special. This was just kind of life as it occurred in her existence. Otherwise, we don't know much about that early life. We do have a pretty good sense that that was what was going on. And that brings us now to the second chapter, around the year 270 to 290. There was a Roman foot soldier whose name was Constantius. He also was nothing special, but he showed up. We don't know how they met exactly, but they met each other. We don't know the circumstances. I'm not going to speculate, but you can probably fill in some of the blanks there. But anyway, they met. They were both about 20 years old at this point. And at that point, he, who was free-born, he wasn't of the slave status, he was a citizen, but lower class, Roman soldier, met her and asked her to become his concubine. And so for the next 20 years, she left behind her capacity as a stabularia, and joined herself with him. She was probably happy to do it. And so for the next 20 years, we don't know a lot more about it than that, actually, from that point on. But she travels with him. He's a soldier. It's not uncommon for these guys to have a concubine with them, and so on. We don't know a lot about his character. I don't know if this was a faithful relationship, but the appearance is that he probably was. I think they were pretty well united during those years. Neither of them had great prospects. The one thing that Constantius had going for him was he was very bright. He was a very bright soldier. And of course, the military, unlike any other institution of the day, did allow for upward mobility based on merit. If you were born in some other status, there might be a rock-solid ceiling that really limits your ability to excel. But in the military, there was a possibility of some upward mobility, and so that was what eventually changed the story. The one and only surviving child they had was named Constantine. He was born in 272. Constantius is still lower rank. Nobody had any reason to think that this kid would have any special history before him as well. He was born somewhere in Serbia, kind of the Baltic region. Best evidence is that there were probably several children born to these two, to Helena and Constantius. Most of them died. There was a sister who may have survived. Her name was Anastasis, but the evidence is not altogether clear. But at that time, it was very common. It was by far most children died either in childbirth or shortly thereafter. It was quite unusual for a child to survive. It just was the way it was. And so they had one surviving child we know of, and his name was Constantine. And so that was 272. Otherwise, we don't know really the details of other pregnancies or births that she may have had in those years with Constantius. All right. Now, things change in the year 286. And to some degree, with all due apologies to my wife, I have to give you a little of the political backstory here. Otherwise, her life doesn't make sense. And so I'm going to do that. Apologies, sweetie, but we have to do this. So this has less to do with Helena right now, but hang on to what we talk about because it'll make her life make much more sense later. So anyway, Diocletian becomes the emperor of the Roman Empire in 286. Up until that time, most of the emperors had not been what you would call models of organizational character or ability. They basically were in it for themselves. I mean, if you're the Roman emperor, you get whatever you want, and some of these guys just got whatever they wanted, and they didn't worry too much about being great emperor. Diocletian was a very, very exceptionally competent ruler. And he inherited a Roman world that was just kind of, I would say, from his point of view, spiraling out of control. There had been a loss of that kind of moral backbone that had made Roman great. There were no Julius Caesars on the scene. There were no Augustus Caesars. There were no great philosophers, no Ciceros, that kind of thing. And he just realized that, this ship is about to crash. The great Roman world that's been such an important part of our history for so many hundreds of years is really heading for the reefs, and he wanted as best he could to try to save it. And so he decided to do everything he could to reinvigorate the Roman world. He was a great organizational guy, and so what he did was he decided he needed some good administrators working under him. He wasn't going to try to run it all himself. He took the Roman Empire and divided it right down the middle between the east and the west. That's really when that division occurred. And then he subdivided north and south. So it's 4 quadrants, you see. And he's still the chairman of the board, but he puts 4 guys in control of these 4 quadrants with marching orders that they are to try to now, working under him, organize and reinfuse a little bit of the Roman spirit in each of their various areas. So that's what he wants to do. Now, by this time, Constantius has had a fairly reasonably successful Roman career. He still has Helena with him. But it becomes obvious that if he really wants to move up, this Helena that he's had with him is a little bit of baggage. He needs to, as the old saying goes, marry up. If he's going to have a career in the military, there's got to be some political ties that are going to open some doors for him, and Helena is just, going to be a problem. And so around the year 290 or so, right about that, he basically says goodbye to Helena. Now, we don't know exactly. They've been together 20 years. She's 40 years old at this point. Maybe she was happy to do it. I don't know. There's no indication historically about how she took that news. I think she understood it. The impression you get is that they really parted on pretty amicable terms. She understood his need to form a new liaison in the Roman world, and that she was an impediment to that. I think she probably was okay with it, but I'm speculating. At least subsequent history would suggest that she wasn't harboring any bitterness about that. So Constantius says goodbye to Helena, and he marries the stepdaughter of the ruler in the south. Now, don't let your eyes glaze over, but here's what's going on. Rome is in 2 sections. You have the northern part and the southern part. And the northern part now is under one administrator, but the guy that's ruling in the south and has the greater authority, really, the greater prestige, is a man by the name of Maximian. And Constantius, for political reasons, winds up marrying the stepdaughter of Maximian. See, so that gives him a connection to a pretty prestigious guy there in the south. And they marry, and Helena kind of is out of the picture now for a while. So that brings us to what I'm calling the silent years. Not totally silent, but we certainly don't have as much information as we might like. What takes place, interestingly, is because of the political connection, because of the better marriage, because of his own native capacities, Constantius now, the father of Constantine, actually is promoted to be what's called a Caesar. This doesn't mean a Caesar over the whole Roman world, but it was a term of art applying to one of these tetrarchs. So he's actually ruling now in the north. And it's partly because of his marriage to Maximian's stepdaughter that he can kind of move up in the ranks and takes that position. So it's a pretty big promotion. And now he is over that northern quadrant, which is north of Italy and so on. At this point, his son, Constantine, is in his mid-teenage years. And so Constantius, who loves his son, is very proud of him and realizes that he has some gifts, sends to Helena and asks Helena to let Constantine come and join him in his military, and she's happy to do that. So they're still in some communication. Constantine leaves Helena. He loves his mother. They seem to have always had a very good and healthy relationship, and but he leaves her behind, and he goes and he joins Constantius in his military. he always, throughout the rest of his career, whatever we know a lot about Constantine, of course, and many times he would acknowledge that a great deal of the education he received courtesy of his dad, who took a special interest in him, taught him, military, administrative techniques, battle strategies, and that kind of thing, and so on. So that was a good connection from him from a professional point of view. So things go along okay, but Diocletian realizes that even though he's done these administrative adjustments, something is still wrong. And the more he looks at it, the more he realizes that the biggest problem he faces as the emperor of the Roman world, the biggest problem he faces is this odd, strange, invasive religion that just seems to be touching everything in the whole Roman world. It's these, what are they called? They're Christians. They're called Christians, And just every time he turns around, he's running into this Christian influence, and he realizes that is sabotaging the heart of what it is to be Roman. Because if you're Roman, you live for the glory of Rome, not for the glory of whatever this Christian thing was. So he just thinks the only way to deal with this, Diocletian says to himself, is to get rid of them. There's a lot of them out there, but if we really put our minds to it, we can just get rid of them. And he launches the single greatest persecution of Christian people in the history of the Roman Empire since Nero. Now, Nero launched an empire-wide persecution of Christians. Up until, from then on, it was sort of sporadic. Christians that they saw it coming, they could flee to the next town. There was this kind of, it wasn't necessarily empire-wide, but now Diocletian just pulls out the stops and says, I want all of these people dead, or at least injured. And so it's a huge campaign, and the forms of torture are almost too ghastly to mention. People had their eyes gouged out. They would be dismembered, tortured in other ways. Many were executed. Many were otherwise maimed, and the details are just horrifying, but that's what he did. And it lasted for 2 years. For 2 years, 303 to 305, was this Diocletian persecution. It was the last great persecution of Christians. And at 305, apparently Diocletian despaired. I'm not going to beat these people. I'm not going to recover Rome. It ain't going to work. And he resigned. He's one of the very few Roman emperors who resigned. I've had it. He died about 5 years later. He kind of passes from the scene. He had no successor. So he does all this damage. Little footnote. I'll just throw this in because I'll forget it later. When Constantine became emperor, he brought in a whole bunch of these Christians who had survived, but many of them were maimed, crippled, blinded. At the Council of Nicaea, he brought them into a special place, and he walked up before all of those people in the first session of the Council of Nicaea, 325, and he bowed the knee to those people. This was the Roman Empire bowing the knee to Jesus. It's a critical moment in the whole history of the Christian movement. But anyway, I throw that in just in passing. But at this point, that's still ahead of our story. So anyway, interesting question. Obviously, up until Diocletian resigned, Constantius and his son Constantine were working for Diocletian and had marching orders to persecute Christians. And it's at least raised the question in some people's minds whether Constantine, before he became a Christian, was a persecutor of Christians. That'd be kind of like the Apostle Paul, that kind of thing. There's some likelihood that something like that might have happened, but we also know that Constantius himself, the dad, was pretty impressed with these Christians. He'd seen them up close and personal, and he was quite touched by the evident kind of poise and confidence and even joy that they exhibited in the face of these horrific attacks on their well-being. And it seems to have left an impression. So the best we can guess, and again I'm saying I'm speculative here, I think maybe he officially persecuted them, but not really. Sort of like put up a good show, but in the final analysis wasn't quite as brutal as would have been the case elsewhere, especially in the south. Maximian in the south was brutal. He did everything he could to stamp them out. But here in this northwest quarter, it's an open question. One way or another, we know that Constantius had a favorable view of Christians, at least through the report that comes from his son, Constantine. As I say, Diocletian just quit. 305, unprecedented really. He just walked away, out of here. He didn't have any successor. And so all of a sudden the Roman world is now 4 different nations, 4 different empires. You see, nobody's in the driver's seat. Constantius is ruling the northwest. Maximian is in the south. A couple other guys over in the east. And so now Constantius, our guy that had been with Helena, is there. And then, oddly enough, he dies the very next year. So 306, Constantius, Constantine's father, dies. And that, of course, brings Constantine to be the ruler of the northwest quadrant. The military men that served under him loved him. Constantine was quite evidently competent and capable, and he had that kind of charisma with the men, and they just by acclamation made him the ruler there at that point. So that's in 306 now, after that 2-year bloody persecution. Constantine was known, and in fact later made it quite clear that he had a pretty favorable view of Christians. He said this is given to us a quote from Eusebius, who's one of the best historians of the life of Constantine. Constantine speaking, quote, "My father revered the Christian God and uniformly prospered, while the emperors who worshiped the heathen gods died a miserable death. Therefore, that I may enjoy a happy life and reign, I will imitate the example of my father," says Constantine, "and join myself to the cause of the Christians who are growing daily while the heathen are diminishing." Now, I'm not going to say that represents heartfelt faith. It may just be political pragmatism. You know what I'm saying? He thinks, let's see, what's working? And he notices, number one, the Christians have a lot of staying power. And number two, even his dad was pretty impressed with them. And number three, the people that ingratiated themselves to the Christians tend to do okay. And so, at that point, whatever his inner heart was, I'm not attributing, conversion to him at this point, but I think it represents at least a kind of insight into the situation. In any event, you can imagine 4 Roman empires. It ain't pretty. It's not good. This is a recipe for some degree of conflict, and that's what takes place. So you begin to see the brewing kind of threat of a civil war, maybe multiple civil wars in which these guys all think they're the ones who should control the whole empire, And that was especially true in connection with Constantine now and his, father-in-law, Maximian, who's down there in Rome, in Italy. Things become increasingly tense over the next few years until the most defining moment probably in Constantine's career, which is called the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. If you know that story, you know what happened. The Christian people who lived in Rome and in Italy and in surrounding areas had been treated to a huge amount of persecution from Maximian, Constantius' father-in-law, and they sent a bunch of emails to Constantine because they had heard that Constantine was actually favorably disposed toward Christians. He's up in the north. They're living under the thumb of Maximian. And so they appeal to him, would you come and rescue us? This guy is making our life miserable. And we've heard that you like Christians. We are Christians. Come and help us. And that was a repeated, and of course Constantine didn't act on that immediately. But the increasing force and pressure of the requests, his own interest in the welfare of Christians, the possibility of his own political advancement, if he defeated Maximian, all of those things play into it. And so in the year 312, he marshals his army, musters them all, brings them across the Alps down into Italy. And in Italy, he is approaching Rome, and there's a river that separates Constantine and his army from Maximian and his. Maximian had more firepower. Constantine knew it. And he was a little concerned. He was hoping this Christian God he'd heard of, that helped people prosper, might kick into gear right now, as he's anticipating a kind of a losing proposition against Maximian. And this gives rise to one of the most famous moments in the history of the church, which is called the vision at the Milvian Bridge. And you probably know this story. But as the story goes, Constantine said he saw a vision in the sky, and it was Chi Rho, 2 letters of the Greek alphabet, and the first 2 letters of the word Christos, Christ. He saw them, and he saw the message, "In this sign conquer." Now, people have done all kinds of things with that. Did that really happen? Did he just make that up? Was he just trying to inspire his men? A little bit of, additional courage? The interesting thing is that Constantine, to the day of his death, maintained that he saw that vision. And he tied that to the moment of his own Christian conversion. And I just would throw in as a footnote, he was not baptized until the very end of his life. Some people view that cynically, thinking, well, he wasn't really a Christian. Look, he didn't even get baptized till... No, you have to understand, in the theology of the day, it was quite commonly believed that if you were baptized and then committed serious sin, mortal sin, Catholic idea, you would be lost and irrevocably lost. And so many people postpone their baptism till their deathbed. Play it safe, And so Constantine did that. And even after he was baptized, he still maintained that vision was real. He saw it, and it changed him. So, that would have been mortal sin to lie about that after he was baptized. I think something happened. Now, I can't explain it to you. I'm as much a product of this time in history as anybody, but I think something happened, and I'm willing to credit his testimony. At any event, he saw that. He told his men what he had seen. He told them to emblazon that Chi Rho sign on all of their equipment, everything, and they were going to join the battle. Well, the Milvian Bridge was a bridge across the river that separated the 2 armies. Maximian, on the other hand, was a bit of a tactician, and he said to himself, I'm going to fight Constantine on his side of the river, but I'm going to destroy the bridge and replace it with pontoons. So, I'm going to march my guys across the pontoon bridge. If we win, fine, we go home. If we are losing, I'm going to bring my guys back across that pontoon bridge and then break the bridge so Constantine can't follow me. You get that? So that's a strategy. So, Maximian crosses the bridge. They have a big battle. Sure enough, Maximian is losing. Okay, guys, retreat. They all run in a panic onto the pontoon bridge, and it breaks. And they all go down. They're all wearing military hardware. They can't swim. They are drowned in that river. Constantine walked over and looked at that and said, that kind of reminds me of the Exodus, Look at all these Pharaoh's armies, and this is the same. And it was a turning point. I have to say to you, the evidence of history is that was truly a turning point in the history of Constantine. He went into the city. He gave a great speech to the Christian people. In fact, everybody in Rome, not everybody was Christian, but they all heard the speech. They all gathered there, very grateful that Constantine had delivered them. And he gave full credit to the Christian God. He said, the reason we won this battle against a losing, kind of proposition was the Christian God intervened. He gave full credit, explained it. There were certain customs that would usually take place in that situation involving sacrifices in pagan temples. Constantine wouldn't have it. He ignored all of that. He simply voiced a very authentically and consistently Christian attribution there. Now, what happens in Helena's life? Helena is living in a city that's called Nicomedia. It's present-day Izmir. In the New Testament, it's called Smyrna. And it's a city in Asia Minor, and that's where she's been living for some extended period of time. We know virtually nothing about what happened except for one incident that occurred about the same time, probably a year or two earlier, but about the same time, as well as we can tell, of that battle at the Milvian Bridge, in which the local rulers were continuing to campaign against Christians, and she happened to witness one Christian person who was executed, I think by burning at the stake. Not sure about that, but I believe that was the way it was. She was there to witness it. She only had passing knowledge, as far as we know, of the Christian, message and movement and so on, but she witnessed this, and she was so impressed at the calm, self-possessed composure of this individual who was just about to go to his death and really was doing so with a sense of joy, almost as if he was seeing what was on the other side. And she was deeply moved by that, and as best as we can tell, it was that incident that moved her to become a Christian herself, realizing that anything that could have that kind of effect in a person's life, confidence in the face of this horrific form of execution, there has to be something to it. So, like I say, I can't say to you with absolute certainty, but that is certainly a well-attested tradition that's associated with her, and I think it's the best of the ones that I've looked at. So that's the one I'm sticking with right now. So I think that's the best way to view it. In any event, she witnessed that, and after that, she was drawn into a community of Christian women in that town, and was there then for another few years. This brings us to what is, I would call, her famous years. Constantine has now become the ruler of the West. The man ruling over the entire East is a shirt-tail relative of his named Licinius. And Licinius picks a battle of, it's one of those deals, again, kind of a potential civil war. Constantine is able to negotiate a resolution, after a little bit of bloodshed, but negotiate a resolution in which Licinius continues to rule, but recognizes that Constantine is in the driver's seat in a sense. But Constantine gives him his control. So we still have East and West, the division there, but Constantine is in the more elevated status. Nevertheless, some years later, about the year 324, Licinius decides to really pick a fight. They go to battle, they have a big battle, Constantine wins, and in 324, Constantine becomes the ruler of the entire Roman Empire. So he's the next true Roman emperor after Diocletian, who had resigned, you recall, back in 305. The biggest problem that Constantine ran into when he became the emperor was all these Christians were at each other's throats. Can you believe that? The Christians couldn't get along because of something that was called the Arian controversy. Arianism has been judged by the church historically as a heresy, but it was very popular at the time. It was a plausible explanation of what we think of Jesus, in which his deity, full deity, was denied, and he was simply a very elevated human being, And the church wrestled with that. The Council of Nicaea took place. I mentioned it earlier. Constantine called it. He wanted to figure this out. I don't think Constantine at this point knew what the right answer was. He wasn't a theologian. He just wanted to get the best Christian minds together, throw them into a smoke-filled room, and come out with an answer, for Pete's sake, so we can figure this out. And so it lasted for some years. 318 bishops of the church gathered in Nicaea, central Turkey, and after some period of time came out with what we call the Nicene Creed, Trinitarian, affirmation of Jesus, both God and man, and so on. That's kind of beside the point. We've talked about that on other times. Now, a little bit of peace. He's ruling the whole world, and he still has this affection for his mother, and he sends to her and wants her to come to him and join him, and he has a proposition for her. He knows that Jerusalem and the Holy Land, Palestine generally, has been kind of a outback. He knows that the Christian story started there. This is not viewed as there's no kind of pilgrimage idea going on yet. It's, people don't travel to that area. But he was convinced that in order to really understand the Christian faith, it was necessary to go try to dig up what our roots were. And he asked his mother, who's now in her mid-70s, I'm almost 77. She was about 77. This was a tall order. And he asked her if she would lead a kind of a team of people that he would assign and pay for to go to the Holy Land and see what's there, to see, what she can find. And so that becomes the famous part of what Helena did. She showed up in Antioch to the north, met the bishop of the church in Antioch, very grateful to see her. She got all kinds of warm praise. I think this must have been quite astonishing to her. She had lived a quite mediocre life. Now, it's true, having your son being an emperor, that was a big deal, but still personally, privately, she still did the dishes and so on. I mean, it wasn't like she was catapulted into anything extraordinary until this moment when Constantine summoned her out of the shadows back into this moment of sort of glory. And so she was welcomed with a great deal of pomp and circumstance, and she traveled down the coast to Caesarea Maritima, it's called. Caesarea, the term in the New Testament. And there she met a man by the name of Eusebius, who is sometimes called the father of church history. The most definitive history of the Christian movement up until that moment was from Eusebius. It's a wonderful read. So if you ever just have some free time and want to read some great history, he's the guy to read. Anyway, he warmly received her, and he gives us the most thoroughgoing, you might say, report of what happened there with Helena in her visit to the Holy Land. From there, she goes straight across to Jerusalem and found the whole place was just buried in kind of pagan shrines and temples and so on, and realizing that all of this didn't represent the Christian heritage at all. It had mostly been put up by a Roman emperor named Trajan back in the early 2nd century, and basically that's where it was. So she authorized destruction of all of these kind of pagan sites, and one of them in particular, as they were digging down, there was the temple to Venus, a pagan goddess kind of thing, and as they dug down into the rubble beneath that, they found 3 crosses. And this, of course, this may be the single most famous thing in Helena's life. They found 3 crosses. Well, you know exactly what they thought. Good heavens, there's 3 Roman crosses, And this did seem to be the place where the crucifixion would have taken place. And so it just occurred to everybody at that point that one of these must be what came to be called the true cross. Now, again, I'm just leaving this to your own critical assessment. I'm just reporting the tradition that's come. But anyway, there was some way of apparently identifying which of those was the true cross of Christ. And what happened, realizing the incredible value that would be associated with that, eventually that cross, under her supervision, was broken down into a lot of little pieces and sent to all kinds of churches all over the Roman world. The whole Christian world got a little piece of the true cross, you see. John Calvin kind of made fun of that many years later because it kept growing. And he said, now he's writing 1,000 years later, he said, there's enough pieces of the true cross out there to sink a battleship. I mean, that was his line, but anyway, I'm not going to blame Helena with that. I mean, I think she was doing, in her mind at that point, the right thing, and so we'll just leave it at that. But anyway, a great structure was put up there. I don't know who's been to Jerusalem, maybe seen this. Okay, so you might recognize this. This was not completed while she was there. It took about 10 years, but she authorized the construction. Of course, Constantine paid for it, and so the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, beautiful basilica inside, and all of these celebrating, at least allegedly, the place where Christ was crucified. There's questions about that. Not every scholar agrees that that's the location. That's a whole different conversation, but that's what she believed, and that's what she did. From there, she went to Bethlehem and found what was apparently the place of Christ's birth, the grotto of his birth, and there's a structure that's built there in Bethlehem. Probably some of you have seen that. She went to the Mount of Olives, and there, of course, the place where the ascension would have taken place, and another structure was put up there. She didn't see any of these, you understand that, but they were authorized by her, and so she was the one who's kind of the prime mover to get the work going. And she also visited a place in southern Sinai Peninsula, which is where people thought the Ten Commandments had been delivered. That's been highly controversial, probably not the right location, but she didn't know any different. So St. Catherine's Monastery is there. These are some great places. Probably the more impressive thing is that there's quite well-established evidence that Helena herself remembered who she was. She never became inflated in the least. I think she knew how ordinary she was. And she many times would take off all of the kind of special clothes you wear if you're somebody special, and she would move and mingle with poor people. She really was very touched by them. She was very moved by their situation. She had a lot to do with releasing prisoners who'd been imprisoned falsely for various reasons and so on. And that really was very much a part of what she did. I think part of what made her so appreciative of people who are in tough situations is she had been in that situation, and she had pretty good memory of her own interesting story down through history. The relic distribution I've talked about a little bit. She and this tour did have a huge effect across the Christian world. And from that point on, there began to be these kind of pilgrimages that would take place to the Holy Land. She was kind of the one who really inspired that, I guess, at the beginning. I have to say, of all of the women we're going to cover in this history, Helena, honestly, is the one about whom we know the least. We know enough to paint a picture. We don't know enough to tell the story of her day-to-day life. And so I know I've been somewhat selective in having to report this to you, but that's about the best that we have to work with. I think it's true, at least safe to say, that she was a remarkable woman, a true Christian convert, and she really did live out her faith in a way that I think should all be inspiring for all of us. The verse I mentioned was, "By the grace of God I am what I am." Yeah, I think she could have said that. She was never given, as far as we know, to any kind of attempt to sort of make herself something special or something that people would honor, and they would tend to do it anyway, but it wasn't because she was calling for it. She says she worked harder than them all. I think at 77, 78, 79 years old, going to the Holy Land and sponsoring this, I think that qualifies as working harder than them all. Yet not I, but the grace of God with me. She died in the year 330, so 1 year later, 80 years old. Actually 82 years old. She died, and that's the story. I typically, for you who may be new, I usually give a little Sunday school lesson at the end, and so I'm going to try to do that as well as we go through these. So my quick Sunday school lesson as we wrap up is simply this for each of us. Your past is what it is, so neither lament it nor boast too much about it. Paul says, forgetting those things that are behind. Paul was always forward-leaning. He had a very interesting history, both good and bad, but it's like he didn't really dwell on that. He was always pressing forward, and I think that's good counsel for all of us, and I think that's probably a lot of what Helena did. Your future will be what it will be by God's grace. So neither waste needless anxiety about it, nor presume on it, but leave it in His hands. There's an old expression, you've all heard it. I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future, and I think Helena probably lived in that thought herself for a great deal of her life, not really knowing. mean, there were a lot of times when it was kind of questionable how things would go, but ultimately God, of course, vindicated her in a remarkable way. And finally, your present, the present now tense, present tense, is God's gift to you at this moment. So accept that by God's grace, you are what you are, and devote yourself fully to exploiting His grace right now. The only thing we really own is the present moment. And this is the moment when we can make a decision to do what is right, to lean into obedience. I can't obey God tomorrow because tomorrow doesn't exist yet. And there's nothing I can do about the embarrassing things in my history. But friends, you can do something about what is right now. And I think Helena teaches us that, and the Bible teaches us that. And hopefully that'll be something. Let's close in prayer and I'll let you go. Father, we are deeply grateful for Helena. We thank you that you used her, not only in ways that we've heard about down through history, but in very quiet ways that we probably know very little about. We thank you for the testimony of her life. We pray that we would learn the things from her that we should, and that we would appreciate her and many others who have shaped history in a way that glorifies Christ. And we ask these things in His name. Amen.